Hello and welcome to the Drexel Interview. I'm your host, Paula Marantz Cohen, speaking to you from the Drexel University Picture Gallery. Today, Nora Ephron returns as my guest. Nora Ephron is a formidable talent, an essayist, novelist, playwright, screenwriter, and director. She's been nominated 3 times for an Academy Award for Original Screenplay. And she's not only written, but produced and directed such already classic romantic comedies as Sleepless in Seattle, You've Got Mail, and Julie and Julia. Her most recent book is I Remember Nothing and Other Reflections. This is the second part of a 2-part interview. In the first part, we discussed Nora Ephron's life and published writing, and in this half, we'll discuss her movies. Nora Ephron, welcome back to the Drexel Interview.
Thank you.
Well, we discussed already your parents, who were screenwriters and specialized in romantic comedies. How did that affect you? I mean, we've already said that you wanted to be a journalist initially, not a screenwriter. But I wonder if you were schooled growing up by them in watching movies and talking about things like structure and pacing and dialogue?
No, I used to, we sometimes used to go hang out. We certainly had been on sets growing up and had met Jimmy Stewart, and we met Fred Astaire, who was in Daddy Longlegs, which is a movie they wrote that's kind of a divine movie.
It is.
And when my father was producing Carousel, which they did the screenplay for, I remember sitting in the mix. The mix is one of the most sort of awful, in my opinion, difficult parts of movie making, where you spend 2 to 6 weeks making sure every sound in the movie is exactly right, and putting in the little bird sounds, and making sure the sound of running water goes under the bathroom scene, and things like that. And it's very meticulous, difficult work, and they were mixing a scene in Carousel that I remember going and just watching 35 times as they did it over and over and over, and crying every single time. So, I certainly knew something about making movies, but I didn't really know anything about it at all.
So when did you realize that you were going to, well, at least get involved in screenwriting?
There was a moment in New York life in the late 70s where everybody tried to write a screenplay, and I was one of them. And I wrote a screenplay, and it was one, and it sort of worked, and it got made as a television movie, and it was not good, by the way. But because of it, someone asked me to do another screenplay. So then I did about 12 screenplays that nothing happened to at all, but I made money for doing them. And right in the middle of this, I got divorced, so I really needed more money than I had been making as a journalist. And I thought, well, I'm just going to write screenplays for a while, and then I'll go back to real writing. But Silkwood was then made, which was my first real movie. And Mike Nichols directed it, and he let me and Alice Arlen, whom I wrote it with, be part of everything. Everything. We got to watch him cast the movie. When he met with the production designer, we got to be there. When he went to Texas to shoot it, we got to go to Texas and go to the set every day and watch Mike Nichols direct Meryl Streep in a movie. So it was like some amazing, it was like going to the greatest film school that anyone could ever have gone to. And at this point I thought, well, this is interesting. This is very interesting. And it wasn't like journalism, which I pretty much knew how to do. And it's always very exciting to be on the learning curve. And I was. So then I thought, well, maybe I'm not going to go back to real writing right away. Maybe I'll go on doing this, because certainly it was paying the rent. And so I kept going.
So do you think, had you not done Silkwood and you had not worked with Mike Nichols, who you said was like a film school unto himself, things might have been different? I mean, it was a unique experience, that movie.
Well, it wasn't entirely unique. I did 2 movies with Mike where I got to, but I also did When Harry Met Sally with Rob Reiner, who also was very nice about having writers around for a different reason. Mike was doing it because he had started in the theater, and in the theater you always have to have the playwright around, and he'd gotten used to that. Rob had come from television, and you always have the writer around when you're in television, because you're always fixing, you're always noodling, you're always saying, is this as good as it can be? So I had 2 directors who let me watch.
So you were lucky in both cases.
Yes.
Now, When Harry Met Sally, I mean, you talk about Silkwood, but When Harry Met Sally really, it seems to me, was your voice. That's where you found your voice. You write in your latest book about the fact that you were working on this screenplay at a point where a relative was, you thought you were going to come in for a large inheritance.
Yes, I did.
And you had delusions of grandeur.
I did. Delusions of wealth is what I had, yes.
Right, wealth. Yeah. And it didn't pan out, but had it done so, you would have thrown aside this screenplay, possibly.
Well, I probably wouldn't have.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
The day I thought I was going to inherit a vast amount of money, which turned out to be entirely untrue, I was at a very difficult point in the screenplay, which happened to be When Harry Met Sally, and I thought, oh, great, I'm going to inherit this money, and I'm not going to have to write all these movies for money. I can just lie around.
So you feel you would have finished When Harry Met Sally, no matter what, even had you inherited a fortune?
Well, probably, yes. But who knows?
Did you feel that sense of something great being made there?
No, I don't think you ever feel that with movies. Movies.
Really?
Well, you certainly don't. You have your moments of delusion, but movies. I learned very early how. I mean, my very first script that was made into the television movie I thought it was a really nice script, and it's really not a good movie. That's the first lesson. Now, by the way, I think it probably wasn't a very good script either. I think I was wrong. I think I wasn't good enough. But at the time, I certainly immediately had a sense of how many elements were required to get something to really work in the way that you wanted it to work. And I remember on When Harry Met Sally, we were shooting a scene one day, and it was the most charming scene. It was the scene where Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan introduce Bruno Kirby and Carrie Fisher inadvertently to one another. And the scene was so much fun to watch, and they had done some charming improvs in it, and I was so happy, and I walked up Broadway afterwards just thinking, oh, this movie is going to work. This little teeny story is really going to be charming, and people are going to watch it for years, because that is the thing you hope with a romantic comedy. And then that night I went to see the dailies, the film of what had been shot the day before. And it was the last scene in the movie. And it was so horrible I couldn't even watch it. By the way, we reshot it 3 times before it worked. And I went home thinking this is going to be a grotesque personal humiliation for me. I mean, that's in one day.
Swing.
In one day, you have that in the movie business. I mean, you simply don't know. And when you direct, it's even more baffling.
Well, I want to get to your directing. I guess your breakthrough film was Sleepless in Seattle, 1993. And I wonder about directing. I mean, it seems to me it must be frightening at first.
Well, it should be frightening. I was not even intelligent enough to be frightened. The truth is, I thought I knew what I was doing. Now I look back on my first movie, which is a movie I like very much, called This Is My Life. And I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing.
But you learned very quickly.
Well, I learned very quickly. You know, my second movie, my cinematographer was Sven Nykvist. So my second movie, I worked with the greatest cinematographer, arguably, who ever lived. There are 5 or 6 others, but also the sweetest, kindest man. And you learn fast when you get to work with somebody like that. But you know, I should have been much more nervous. My first movie was a very small movie. I mean, I didn't start out doing something. Every so often, people send me scripts of their first movies, and I look at this and I think, you can't do this. You can't have horses in your first movie. You can't, you know, it has
to be smaller.
It has to be small. It has to be, and I definitely started with something that was the right size for a first movie.
Well, do you think, you said that you couldn't tell with When Harry Met Sally if it was going to be good. Do you feel the same way as a director, that you can't tell? Or do you feel now you're so
for
seasoned?
Sure you can't tell. For sure you can't tell. I mean, one of the things I wrote about in my book is that what I've learned is that when you're shooting a movie where the crew is absolutely having the greatest time imaginable, and the cameraman is stuffing Kleenexes in his mouth because to keep from laughing and ruining the sound on the tape, you are probably in deep trouble. That's what I learned. The first time it happened, I thought, oh, this is the funniest movie ever made. No one can even, no one can even watch this. It's so funny. But it just doesn't always
correlate.
Work.
Yeah.
Movies, it's one of the things that I think is it upsets me when I see a movie that doesn't work, because, whether it's mine or anyone else's, because it takes so long to make a movie. It is such a huge chunk of the lives of the people who do it. The actors give you a slot, which could be a 3-month slot or a 5-month slot, but it's what they did in the first 6 months of whatever year. The editor gives you more than a year of his life or her life. And then when it doesn't work, you just feel terrible. And that's true when I see other people's movies, when you just think of the number of people who went into it often thinking it was going to be good, sometimes just thinking it was going to pay the rent, but sometimes really thinking it was going to be good and working so hard. It is, the length of the days is inhuman and ridiculous in the movie business.
You strike me as somebody who likes to have a lot of control, and I wonder about your going into movies. I mean, when you were in the writing end, just being a writer, whether it was a journalist or a fiction writer or an essayist or whatever, you had complete control. And you had to cede so much of that control, it seems to me, when you went into movies.
You mean when I was a screenwriter?
Well, a screenwriter and as a director, because
yes, there's no control in a movie because there's so many people making a movie.
How do you deal with that?
Well, it's part of what movie making is, and the fun is if you're working with great collaborators, if you're working with great costume people or great cinematographers, and they have a much better idea than you do, which they mostly do because they're better at what they do than you are at what they do. It's very exciting.
Glorious.
It's unbelievable. And the day that Meryl Streep and Stanley Tucci turned up for their costume tests on Julie and Julia, and Anne Roth, one of the greatest costume designers ever, had done the costumes. And I'd seen some of them. I'd seen Meryl being fitted in a couple of her little Julia Child suits. But the two of them walked onto the set, and it was just, the set was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And there they were on it, and she was Julia Child, and he was Paul Child, and it was just, you know, now you can say, well, I had control over that. I would have said, don't make that suit if I had hated them. But you're not looking for control when you're making a movie. You're looking for a place where people feel free to do whatever they can.
So do you think it taps into something, what part of you does it tap into? Is there a social element there as well as a creative?
Well, yes, I mean,
yeah.
And when I did my first movie, I went around to all of my friends who were directors and gave them the script and asked for advice. And Rob Reiner said to me, "You're having a party. That is what you're doing. It's a party and you are the host." And that seemed like a very natural thing for me, since I like having parties and I like feeding people. And you get to do a lot of that on a movie.
How would you describe your directing style? I mean, you are, as a woman and as a writer and as you self-professed now aging woman, as we've talked about. Is there something very idiosyncratic about or particular about who you are on the set?
I love actors, and I'm very, very free about letting them
Give feedback.
do things and improvise and change and all of that stuff.
Do you think you learned some of that from Mike Nichols?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, you have been compared to Dorothy Parker. I don't know if you realize that. I don't think that that's apt, because she was kind of sour. And you strike me as not at all that. And in fact, the personage I would compare you to is Preston Sturges. I'm sure you've heard this before.
Bite your tongue.
The great...
No, that would be great. But
tell me about your thoughts about Preston Sturges.
I think he's completely wild, fabulous director, and I wish, you can see there's a whole bunch of his movies that it's very clear the same person made them.
Yeah.
Do
you have a favorite among either his films or the classic romantic comedies that you might want to mention?
I have a bunch of them. I mean, I love The Palm Beach Story. That's just a fantastic, hilarious movie. I love It Happened One Night. I love a lot of Stanley Donen's things. Indiscreet is a big favorite of mine. And I could.
You could go on.
Yeah.
What about actors and actresses from that period? If you were to cast a movie with actors from the past, who would you choose?
There's so many great ones. I mean, Jean Arthur, wouldn't she have been
Arthur
fun
is
to
my favorite.
Work with? And Claudette Colbert is hilarious. She's great. Mary Astor.
So who do you think nowadays approximates
Audrey Hepburn.
Oh, Audrey Hepburn.
Would that have been unbelievable to make a movie with Audrey Hepburn? I can't imagine what that would have been like.
I think you would have been great directing Audrey Hepburn.
I don't know. She was great no matter who directed her.
What was it like directing Meryl Streep?
What was it like? It was, well, there's nobody like her. There's nobody like her. And so
elaborate a little in terms of her talent, her versatility.
There's almost no job she couldn't be doing in addition to the one she is doing, including yours.
Oh, really?
And she's so prepared. She's so. She has done so much reading. She has worked so hard to make it look as if she's not working. She's such a gifted writer that when you start playing with the text, it's often better than what was on the page.
So she has actually made changes on your text?
No,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the way I shoot is that once you do the scene,
Yeah.
then I say, do anything you feel like at the end. At the end. I usually keep the scene kind of where it is. But you want it, what you're looking for is life. You're looking to have a scene that feels as if it happened and that you're not seeing performance and acting and writing in. And that's why you want actors to find their way in and then feel free to throw things in if they feel like it.
Can you give an example of a scene which you felt maybe started, I don't know, not dead, but not there, and then moved to that point?
But the scene in Julie and Julia where they have lunch with Jane Lynch, who plays Julia Child's sister, is a scene that I could have shot we shot it in, half a day or something. It's a long scene. Really long scene, and I could have shot it for days and days, and we still would have found, because they were having so much fun with the cheese. Now, all of this, it was in the scene, so it was on the page, and yet they added just a word, just an extra thing, just a hilarious line. There's a moment in it where Stanley says something about, oh God, I can't remember, but the point is that he says something and Meryl looks at him and she said, "It's my husband." And he said something so nothing, but it was so much about...
It was life, it was about marriage.
And that's the kind of thing
I've never heard anyone speak this way about directing, on the notion that it could go on forever. You have to sort of stop it at a certain point.
Well, you have to stop
decide
it
it's good enough.
when you've got it. You have X number of hours to shoot a scene, and therefore, if you want to do it in 12 shots, you probably can't do it in 12 shots. You have to do the ones you really want. It's all the clock is telling you part of what you can do.
But I love this notion that if you had all the time in the world, you could probably keep on doing that scene and elaborating it.
There are just some scenes that are very rich and funny, especially... One of the things I learned very early is scenes with 3 people in them are the most fun scenes because it's always 2 people against 1 and then it shifts. And those scenes I just love them in every movie I see them in.
Oh, that's terrific point. I'll watch that now when I watch movies. I want to talk a bit about your Broadway play that you wrote with your sister.
Yes,
Love, Death, and What I Wore.
Yeah.
What was it like, first of all, writing a play as opposed to a screenplay, and also collaborating with your sister?
Well, I've collaborated with her on most of the movies I've directed, so
you obviously have a wonderful sisterly relationship.
We do, and I love writing with her. I love it. And this play...
Why is that? What's the division of labor?
Because we understand... There's no division of labor. There's none.
Yeah.
Sometimes she sits in the chair, and sometimes I sit in the chair, and sometimes she makes lunch, and sometimes I make lunch. And that's about what it is. That's how the labor divides. And but the play, it's a series, really. It's a series of sketches and monologues. It's not a 2 or 3 act play. It's it's about women and their clothes. And we both read the book Love, Loss, and What I Wore by Eileen Beckerman that it's based on. And we both loved it. And I said this could be a little evening in the theater, and so we sent out emails to all of our friends, and we asked them to tell us about their clothes. And they all wrote back and told us about their mothers, and their sisters, and their husbands, and their boyfriends, and their ex-husbands, and so, we made it into a play. It was fun. It's still playing off Broadway.
I know.
Opening in Paris, Rio de Janeiro,
oh my gosh,
and Sydney the same week next year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. Which of your movies are you most proud of?
Oh, I don't have that.
You don't have any favorites?
No.
So do you have a certain kind of movie that you'd like to do that you haven't done yet?
Oh.
Or do you think is romantic comedy
tell you what.
your genre?
I don't know.
You don't think in those terms?
I think that I am never going to make, I think that I'm always going to be interested in something that has walls. I like.
What is that? What do you mean?
I mean, that's inside
Oh,
as opposed
domestic.
to outside. Yes, I just happen to like those things. I do have in my sad pile of things that didn't get made a war movie. Really?
Really?
I'm not
A
kidding.
serious movie.
It's a serious movie, and I love it very much. But it is a romance.
So is this a movie you want to make, or just a sort of?
I would like somebody to make it. It doesn't have to be me. I'm not necessarily interested in spending 4 months outside. I'm just not.
You're an inside girl.
I'm an inside person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're out of time, and I want to thank you so much, Nora Ephron. It's been a pleasure.
It has been
I have
my pleasure.
wanted for so
Okay.
long to interview you, and you have been worth it.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today at the Drexel Interview.